Today on Crafty Brewers.
Strawberry is a tough flavor in beer. It's not a very strong flavor to get as a puree. You add it to a yellow beer, right? And it kind of turned gray. So it just sort of looked disgusting.
It's like, it looked like weird Pepto-Bismol, man. I'm not gonna mess with that again.
It is good brewing water in Chicago.
What makes it good brewing water?
You don't want a super hard water.
Take a sip of it without looking at it, because your eyes, while they're the first sense that you use, for the most part, they're also the one that lies to you most easily.
People have said that the draft stout that you drink here in America tastes different than the draft stout you drink in Dublin.
I think there's two reasons.
Welcome to Crafty Brewers Tales Behind Craft Beer, the podcast that will increase your enjoyment of craft beer and your admiration for the people who create it. We've traveled to the West Loop neighborhood of Chicago to go from grain to glass with Megan Schwarz. She's the senior brewer, and Ryan Wagner. He is Guinness's national ambassador. We are at Guinness Open Gate Brewery. We are going to share the stories that make each brewer unique. I'm beer drinker and hellraiser Brian Noonan. All my opinions are strictly my own for good reason. Behind the camera is our executive producer, Cody Goff. Cody, I know you are very excited to be at Guinness Open Gate Brewery.
Is that how you say it? It's Guinness, right?
I believe it's Guinness.
Right.
The U is silent.
Oh, is it really?
No.
See, you've been pronouncing it wrong your entire life.
Yeah, well, we'll work on that in this episode. I'm very excited because Guinness has a location in Chicago, and I'm going to be able to drink a Guinness soon, except I'm not going to be drinking a Guinness soon because I'm not actually drinking a Guinness, and that's a myth that we're just going to bust right off the top of this episode, are we not?
Did I pay you to say that? I don't remember paying you to say that, but that was excellently said.
Wow.
I've been to a couple beer events. I may have talked to some people, and let's just dive into that.
Yeah. It's something that we say it's part of the vernacular around here. When you work at the Open Gate Brewery, I have the great privilege and great honor of training our entire staff, and I did the same in Baltimore. And one of the first rules we have is that if you're going to be serving beer here at the OGB, the Open Gate Brewery, if somebody walks up to the bar and says, "Bartender, I want a Guinness," your response is, "Which one?" Because they're all Guinness. Guinness is a brewery, not a beer name. Right. The beer that everybody in this country especially knows and loves is a beer called Guinness Draft Stout. And so we try to remind people that the reason these Open Gate breweries exist is to change the way that people perceive Guinness. It's to change the way people have always thought of Guinness, which is as a beer, not as a brewery. If they think of us as a beer, innovation, creativity, those things go out the window. Right. But when you remember that we're a brewery, all of a sudden it's okay to try an English Golden Ale, a New Zealand Pilsner, a cream ale.
Well, and that's the focus behind it. And you nice segue into my first question for you before we get to Megan, who creates the beers. You, as you said, you were on the ground floor of opening the first OGB in Baltimore. What was the concept behind the OGB? And then what did Diageo, who is now Guinness's parent company, what made Chicago a logical move for the second location?
Yeah, it's interesting. When we opened Baltimore in 2017 is when we started brewing. We opened the main facility in 2018. We got the question, why Baltimore, an awful lot. Okay. Here in Chicago, we don't get that question nearly as much because I think Guinness is such a huge part of the fabric of Chicago. The Irish community here is very prevalent, very strong, very powerful in this city. And Guinness Draft Stout in particular, but also the brand of Guinness is very, very strong. A lot of great Irish pubs, a lot of great neighborhood bars and pubs. Chicago's a city of pubs. That's one of the things I think Megan and I both love so much about it. But in terms of opening Baltimore, Diageo, which is the company that Guinness founded in 1996, we took a look at, again, if you're going to compete in an American market where craft beer, 20 years ago, it was exciting and it was exploding everywhere. Now, I think people just understand that if you're drinking beer in the United States, you've got an incredible amount of variety at your disposal. Right. And if Guinness was going to compete and be an authentic part of the American beer scene, there's no better way to do that than to provide that same level of creativity and innovation and choice. The Open Gate Brewery concept actually comes from Dublin. The PRU, or Product Research Unit, at St. James's Gate Brewery in Dublin opened in 1904. Okay. If you fast forward a little over 100 years to 2015, the head folks at Guinness decided that it was time to open the gates, quite literally, and let people in for the first time to see what was new, what was exciting, what was different. And so the Open Gate Brewery had its foundations at the PRU in 2015. A couple years later, Baltimore opens. A couple years after that, here we are in Chicago.
Very nice. And I've had the pleasure of being at the Open Gate in Dublin, and it is an amazing thing to see. All right, Megan Schwarz, you are the senior brewer here at the OGB, as I said. I am going to get this out of the way. Just so you know, growing up, I have never said anything other than I want a Guinness, and I feel bad about it.
No, it's okay. It's all right. We're changing minds.
I
every
think
time.
even we...
We're guilty. We're guilty of it.
And I know Guinness brews a lot of different beers.
Yeah.
I want to start with your background because you came to brewing in general, and Guinness in particular, a different way. A lot of brewers we talked to, they studied brewing at this day, or they were home brewers.
Yeah.
You didn't study anything like that in college, did you?
No, I was my degree is in chemical engineering. I went to school in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins. And then I just wasn't really sure what I wanted to do within that field and applied to a bunch of breweries that I knew about, and someone in Baltimore hired me. So I started my career as a brewer, and I moved into quality. So I was a lab tech for a little bit, and that's when I got hired within Diageo, within Guinness. I started as a lab tech.
Is there any correlation between what you studied, biochemistry, and brewing? I mean, chemistry, we kind of figure there's a connection.
Fermentation is chemistry, right? So there is a bit of understanding within that field. I wouldn't say there's a direct relationship, but it's in there somewhere, right? All of us brewers are like a little bit chemists.
I think chemists and mad scientists is a nice combination for brewers. Now, when you started, you said at Guinness in quality. What does that mean for people who aren't sure about that?
So a lot of analytical testing, making sure, like easiest example, just make sure ABV is in spec, those types of things. I did a lot of micro work, so a lot of microbiological testing, making sure the beer that we're drinking is safe and not spoiled and things like that.
So once you're in quality for a while, and then when and how do you make the jump to brewing?
Yeah, so I always loved brewing. Obviously, that's where I started, and I loved the brewing team in Baltimore. That's probably what was the biggest motivation to go back to brewing, was I really loved the team. And I just missed the grain to glass piece of it. Okay.
And there was the model in Baltimore the same as here, where you're brewing the type of beer that isn't being imported from Guinness in Dublin.
Correct. Yep. Same type of system that we have here. We have a little 10-barrel DME system, and it's a very similar system in Baltimore. Just a bigger tap room in Baltimore.
Okay.
But the idea is the same.
And why Baltimore?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I know you said that before. You said people always ask, why Baltimore? Why Baltimore?
It was a massive question that we got. And as a Baltimore native, my answer, it got to the point where my answer was always some version of why not? Like I would get very angry at people.
Yeah.
Baltimore gets an interesting rap, I think, around the country and around the world. For the most part, I think the thing that most people know about Baltimore is a show from a couple of years ago on HBO. I won't mention its name. I'm not going to continue all of that for Baltimore. I think most people know what I'm talking about.
Hold on, Stringer Bell's on the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, call him back, tell him we're back up. Look, brilliant television, but I don't think that's representative. I don't think any television show made about any city is representative of that city, particularly when it's a fiction. So, people from Baltimore, we spend a lot of time defending the city to other people, trying to convince them that it's okay to be in Baltimore, that it's an amazing town filled with great food, great drink, great people. And so I think Baltimore in some ways was where the first Guinness brewery purpose-built on American soil was meant to be. The other thing I'll say about Baltimore is that the things that are ours, we are fiercely defensive and protective of. So if we went to bat for the city, if we were meaningful parts of the community, like Guinness tries to be really all over the world, we knew that the people in Baltimore were going to go to bat for us. Now, why Baltimore? We did own that site. I would say that's probably part of the reason.
It was a site that for a long time had aged Captain Morgan rum. So Diageo is also a big spirits brand. So there was a big packaging site as well. So then they just sort of added on the little 10-barrel tap room.
The site in Baltimore is also incredibly historic, just like this building. I mean, where we're sitting now is a 1907 rail depot. The idea of taking something old, making it new again, I think for Guinness, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
We're still brewing on the same site that Arthur Guinness started brewing in 1759.
Yeah.
So, there's a romanticism that I think Guinness has about reestablishing old structures, breathing life into places that maybe are in need of a little TLC. And for Baltimore, the site was one of the first legal whiskey distilleries after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933.
Okay.
So the history of beverage alcohol at that site is pretty unique. It's pretty special.
This I want to ask both of you a question that's similar, but from different, avenues. So, Ryan, was there hurdles coming here? Because, like you said, people in Chicago have been drinking draft stout for years. But a lot of people don't know that Guinness brews other things, like blonde and all kinds of things. Was there any hesitation coming and opening a huge facility for people who may not? There's a lot of people who don't like stouts. Mm-hmm. And was there a grace period of trying to convince people that, hey, there's a lot more, or just opening the doors with the menu, with food and everything else, people just came in?
Well, I mean, I tell you, for me, there was no hesitation as soon as I knew we had Megan coming.
Okay.
The beer that Meg and Nate, our team here in Chicago, make are second to none. All due respect to our pals at breweries in Chicago, and we know quite a few of them. There's a lot of great beer being made in this city. But once I knew Megan was going to be here, the time and attention that our team, people like Sean Brennan, Todd Perkins, our team back in Baltimore, Sean's our brewmaster here in the U.S., so he kind of oversees everything. We knew the beer was going to be good. Now, in terms of convincing people that it's okay to try something other than stout, that's always going to be a process. I think, Guinness has gone to great lengths, and we've put a lot of work into owning stout. When you think about stout, you think about Guinness, and that's a great thing. But what's a challenge to that is stout makes up a very small percentage of the beer world. So we didn't want to limit ourselves in that way.
Sure.
And I think once people get to these buildings, once they see the tap list, once they interact with a member of our staff, it's really easy to see, okay, wait, this is a little bit different than what I might have expected. I will say in Chicago, there seems to be a greater commitment to sticking with Guinness Draft Stout. But I think that's, part and parcel to how much beer is available in this city.
Yeah.
People coming to Guinness, they want to start with a Guinness Draft Stout, but they're finding all kinds of things after they've had that pint. And maybe they finish with a pint of Guinness Draft Stout. But those middle beers are going to be the beers that Megan and Nate are making every day.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you, Megan. Not that, you're coming in Baltimore, you come in, you're going to start brewing under the Guinness umbrella, which has got to be a little intimidating, right?
Yeah.
So then how do you say, okay, we're going to be unique, we're going to brew some different types of beers? Was there in the back of your head going, oh man, but it's just a little worry, not that it's you're going to fail, not that your beers aren't going to be great, but it's like, it's Guinness. We're under Guinness, so we got to be.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are all just normal brewers. Like we don't make some awesome beer sometimes. Like I like to think it's pretty good most of the time, but it's not always.
What was your latest
perfect?
What was your latest not perfect recipe?
We made a beer for Women's History Month.
I knew you were going to go there.
That's like the one beer at this brewery that I actually think it was okay. It was a red rice ale with it was like an Asian bird's eye chili pepper
and lemongrass.
The lemongrass was tough. It just didn't really come through in the right way. And I can't handle like any spice in my food or beverages. And it was just too spicy for me. I actually think it was not horrible. I think it was just a little weird.
We had this amazing moment. Was it 2 or 3 days ago? Because it was a collaboration between Megan and our head chef. Our chef Taylor. And Taylor, when we were speaking to her about that beer, it got brought up in conversation a few days ago. And she was like, yeah, I don't think Meg and I were good enough friends yet. It was because we weren't good enough friends yet.
We tried to be a little too creative with it. Yeah. Like she loved Asian food. We tried to incorporate a lot of stuff. And I think it was just a little too much.
I think my favorite question that we get, and I've dragged Meg and Nate to a couple of beer festivals here and there throughout the last year and a half or so. There are people that are 100% convinced, cannot be convinced otherwise, that we are somehow not Guinness. That we have taken the name.
Oh, like
and
a franchise?
We have taken the logo. No, that we're using it illegally.
You just took it.
We had somebody at the Great American Beer Festival a few years ago that was trying to get on the phone to Guinness to let them know that there was someone pirating their intellectual property while they were standing in front of us. And we were like, sir, we are Guinness.
Like an official from Great American Beer
Festival? No. This was just somebody that happened to be in town.
Like a citizen's arrest.
Yeah. Oh, it was hilarious. And we're like, sir, we are Guinness. And he's like, well, how do they know you're using the harp? I'm like, they are us. We are them. And and Meg's been there for some of this. Like people come up and they're like, so wait a minute, who? How?
Well, the beer festivals are always fun because people come up to the booth and they're like, the normal one.
Yeah,
can you just give me the normal one? looks like. So we have 3 lagers.
But where's the black one?
I've never taken Guinness Draft Stout to a beer festival the entire time
never.
Open Gate Brewery has been around. You can't do it.
No,
I mean, we could. We thought about taking it to Great American Beer Festival just because we knew all the brewers would show up and they're like, "You guys have draft?" And we're like, "Yeah, absolutely." But it's fun, man. It's so fun to see that it's something that people have been convinced about their entire lives. If you know one thing about Guinness, you know that it's that beer.
Yep.
And then when you show up and here's all of these other things, it's a fun moment. It really is.
It is. I remember when Blonde made its debut here in Chicago, and everybody was like, "Oh, Guinness, this is not dark at all." It was good. It was good stuff.
Yeah.
Meg, when you started brewing at Guinness, were you trying to create styles that would complement Guinness's lineup too, or was it completely unique recipes and your favorite styles?
Yeah, when I first started, so I started brewing with Guinness in I don't even know the year.
19, probably?
Yeah.
Late 2019?
Yeah, maybe. So we had already been brewing for a couple years, right? We had, standard recipes. We probably had a couple hundred recipes or something at that point. So I was trying to maybe just do something a little more creative for when I ever created something. Do
you remember the first recipe was the first beer you brewed that was your
recipe?
That was my next question.
It was
that's all right. No,
it was
I'm going to
Kentucky
sit back.
Common.
It was what?
The Kentucky Common.
That's right. I remember that. That was a great beer.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
Is it something that still gets produced?
No, we haven't brewed it again.
We might have to bring it back here.
Yeah, maybe.
What happened?
No, I mean, it was good. I think I've just always wanted on to the next, try something else. But that was a style we had never done. So it's sort of just let's try this.
And people, we've talked about some commons before, but what is a common?
Kentucky Common?
Yeah, what's a Kentucky Common?
It was it's an older style. It's an amber ale for the most part. Some people do a sour mash, but we just did a normal fermentation.
Wasn't it? It's an adjunct, right? Corn or rice
it
or
was
something.
A corn. Yeah, corn beer.
Now,
why it's called a common, I couldn't say.
We've had a couple other places that had brewed commons, and everybody kind of had the same thing. We don't know why it's called common.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of a table thing. When you're the senior brewer here.
Yep.
When it comes down to you making your recipes, being innovative, creative, do you get a lot of guidance from above, or are you guys autonomous to say, this is what we're brewing in our brew house? People come in, they know the Guinness lineup is here. We're going to give them what we really think is our best.
Yeah, for the most part, we get to do what we like. Obviously, there's oversight from our brewmaster and head brewer in Baltimore. Sure. But they sort of let us have free reins on what we do here. We try to just sort of keep an even mix of ABVs and styles and colors and that sort of thing. But otherwise, we get to play around with what we want.
Is there a style that was popular when you were brewing in Baltimore that may not be as popular here and vice versa? Something that people in Chicago love that Baltimore people are like, you're out of your mind.
The one I think of, it was on our opening tap list because it was one of my favorite beers, and that was sort of our opening tap list was just like Megan's favorite beers. But
it's almost the name of the brewery.
That's nice.
But it was an Italian Pilsner that just did terribly. No one liked it.
That didn't move.
And then,
we renamed it 4 or 5 times to try to.
It was just a dry hopped Pilsner, and it's delicious. I love it. I still like that beer. But and then for St. Patrick's Day, forever in Baltimore, we've made this Irish breakfast tea amber. Ooh. So it's an amber ale steeped in a breakfast tea.
Cody, you would love
a favorite in Baltimore.
It's so good.
It's one of our favorites. Didn't move at all here.
Really?
So slow. And I know amber ales are amber ales, but in particular, I feel like Chicago is just having a different reaction to these maltier beers than I've seen in Baltimore.
And the opposite was true in Chicago versus Baltimore. So there are 2 beers that we've done every St. Patrick's Day in Baltimore. One is Irish Breakfast Tea Amber. The other is Clover Honey Ale, which is a golden ale. It's a little bit higher gravity, and we add clover honey from a apiary in Maryland. That beer always undersells Breakfast Tea Amber in Baltimore. It moves a little bit slower. People they like it, but they're not crazy about it. Here, Clover Honey Ale was gone.
Really?
In a matter of days.
People are obsessed with it.
Yeah, people were obsessed with that.
Delicious.
I mean, it is.
And we kept bringing up Breakfast Tea Amber. We're like, what about this one? And they're like, I'm not sure about that one.
We don't drink a lot of tea here. We're coffee people.
Apparently.
We're coffee people here.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
You said you bring that for St. Patrick's Day?
Yeah, we're bringing it back. I'm
bringing it
committed to
again.
Breakfast Tea Hammer. We're doing it again. I want to see if that was just a 1-year fluke.
No, I don't think so. But
Are you bringing them both?
How does St. Patrick's Day compare here to in Baltimore?
I think Meg and I both worked at the Baltimore Brewery as we've mentioned. So I think anybody that has been to the Baltimore Brewery or has worked in the Baltimore Brewery will always miss the space of the Baltimore Brewery because they have so much room. The beer garden in Baltimore is 3 acres.
Holy
What?
cow.
Yeah, it's humongous. We have 400 parking spaces. Here in Chicago, we have this many.
Yeah.
We have 0 parking spaces.
Oh, we're aware.
Yeah. Well, we had a
places.
fruit beer on that just kicked a couple days ago called "Sorry About the Parking." Legitimately called that. So yeah, I mean, I look, there is a huge Irish American community in Baltimore. Baltimore is home, believe it or not. You can look this up, to the only Irish Railroad Workers Museum. By the way.
Really?
Yeah, we take Irish heritage very seriously in Baltimore. So I think there is a lot of passion around St. Patrick's Day, but look, we're in the epicenter of St. Patrick's Day in the United States. So it is a very different vibe. It's a very different environment out here. We been lucky enough to be on the boat when they dye the river. I mean,
cool.
There's something very, very unique about the way this city celebrates St. Patrick's Day. And, to work for Guinness and to be in a town like Chicago that time of year. Are we tired? Yes. Are we excited? Absolutely. There's nothing like working for Guinness around that time of year, but there's certainly nothing like being in Chicago.
Guinness also big ties with Notre Dame, and Chicago is a Notre Dame town. So
it's an exciting year for that, man.
Yes.
We picked a good year. We've been with them a few years now, and that was one of those sponsorships that that had nothing to do with us at the Open Gate Brewery. We're merely the beneficiaries of it. But when they signed that deal, everybody I talked to went, "Guinness isn't it? You guys weren't. Wait a minute. How are you not already sponsors of Notre Dame?" I was like, "Oh, we were, but just unofficial."
Yeah.
It was the most, duh moment in the history of Guinness, I think
Well, we are with Megan Schwarz, senior brewer, and Ryan Wagner. He is the head of marketing and Guinness's national ambassador. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, Megan it's brewer's choice. So you are going to showcase one of the beers that you are proud of. We have got more to come. It's Crafty Brewers at Guinness Open Gate Brewery. We are back with Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer, and we are at Guinness Open Gate Brewery. Our guest today, Megan Schwarz, she is a senior brewer, and Ryan Wagner, he's the head of marketing and Guinness's national ambassador, which means he gets to drink Guinness all over the country. Not too shabby. How does one get a job like that?
You got to pry it from my cold, dead fingers.
That is a pretty good gig. The Open Gate Brewery, if you don't know, is at 901 West Kinsey Street in Chicago. You can go to GuinnessBreweryChicago.com to get all the information, the menus, all of that. We have come to the point where we let our brewer pick something that something new, something they're proud of, something that's unique. And that's what your system here is all about, being unique and bringing something different than the normal Guinness catalog to Chicago.
Yeah, so we have a beer called Tmave Pivo. It's a dark Czech lager. It's something we've brewed for a couple years. We were brewing it in Baltimore before we came out here, and it was just one of those beers that sort of everyone loved. Staff loved it. People would be asking for it. So... And it's always fun, like Ryan likes to say, it's a dark beer that's not Guinness Draught Stout that people, are expecting. So, one of our favorites, 6.2% dark Czech lager, Saaz hops, just really nice. Has those like roasty notes you expect from a stout, but then finishes, clean like a lager would.
Yeah, that's what you get. You do get all of that, and the clean finish, very effervescent in your mouth. It's got the same coloring as a draft stout. Is that from the roasted malts?
Yep, from the specialty malts.
Stage lighting is very good for looking at beer, by the way.
Look at this.
It's probably a bit darker than draft stout.
Yeah,
Draft stout has a bit of like a ruby hue if you actually look at it under the light.
I don't spend a lot of time looking at it when I get it in front of me.
Yeah.
This one is this beer leans almost more like chestnutty. It's like brownish black as opposed to that
ruby
ruby red.
Especially if you poured it in like a bigger glass. Yeah, it is a little like browny black, but
Meg advocating for the larger pour of Tmave Pivo.
Could have had a whole big thing. Is there a significance with the name?
Tmave Pivo. It means dark beer.
Dark beer in Czech. So similar to Schwarz beer in German. Yeah, so this is sort of the Czech answer to Schwarz beer.
Yeah.
What makes a lager a Czech lager?
this style, originated from there. We use Czech hops.
Okay.
We didn't necessarily use Czech malt per se, but it was like the style that was created there.
It's going to be a little bit of an elevated ABV as well. Okay. So typically Czech beer, unless you're talking about some of the table beers and things that are lower ABV, you get a little bit more elevated. So our Schwarz beer, which is also one of my favorites that we make, is where did that 5.1? Yeah. So this one's 6.2. You get a little bit of that elevation in ABV, which is pretty style standard across the spectrum of Belgian beer.
And or
Czech beer, excuse me.
When people come in and they're used to the draft stout, where do you think, and this is for both of you, where do you think a hesitancy comes for some people with dark beer? I mean, I remember being a kid and being afraid of the draft stout without ever tasting it. And then I wised up, and now it's, like mother's milk. And I love dark, I love malty, but some people are afraid.
I think number one is the association that a lot of people have with dark liquid equaling heavy liquid, equaling rich, equaling filling. We hear a lot from people about Guinness Draft Stout in particular. Oh, I don't drink that stuff. It's like drinking bread. It's like liquid bread. When in fact, the opposite is true, right? It's lower in calorie. It's lower in density. It really sits lighter on your stomach. And similar to a beer like this, I think they see this. And I this is my own opinion. But I think the propensity in the United States for big, hearty, rich, barrel-aged stouts, these kind of like syrupy almost stouts, I think that's what people associate with dark beer for the most part. And so when you get a beer like this, that's very light, it's very crisp, it's very easy drinking, it really belies what people think about dark beer. So we joke all the time that when somebody comes in, and we do get a fair number of them, people that have never had Guinness Draft Stout or never had a beer like Tamave, the best way to try it, like, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of it. Close your eyes. Take a sip of it without looking at it, because your eyes, while they're the first sense that you use for the most part, they're also the one that lies to you most easily. So keep your eyes closed, try the beer on its own merit. Don't look at it and assume that looking at it is going to tell you anything meaningful about it.
All right. Then you got a lot of people with their eyes closed, falling off stools.
Exactly.
Banging into walls. Yeah. I like that. What do you have a style, Megan, that you like to brew more than others? Is there something that you keep, or a style that you keep pushing to get done that maybe everybody's like, that might be a little too experimental for us?
They just brewed mine. I'm very excited. It only took me 8 years.
I was going to say that we brew a lot of lagers here just because we like to drink a lot of lagers. Okay. So that's sort of what that is. Ryan's been begging for a Weizenbock for like 7 years.
7.5 years.
So the new brewer just, he wrote a recipe. So it's actually...
I had to move to Chicago away from the rest of our brewing team, and finally Nate gave me a Weizenbock.
What is a Weizenbock?
So it's I defer to the brewer, but, style standard. I haven't tried Nate's yet, by the way.
It's like style standard.
Yeah. Elevated ABV. So the word Bock, in German, translates to strength. Okay. So you're going to add a little bit of strength. So Helles is a German style that most people would be familiar with. Right. A Helles Bock is a Helles style that's a little bit elevated. So it's the same situation here. It's just a wheat beer that's been brewed at a higher, strength.
Okay.
So you get all of those wheat characteristics. The banana, I'm assuming we're going to get a little bit of clove, maybe.
So color can vary a lot with the style. Ours is sort of like a darker amber. A lot of banana in ours. Ours is we have a centrifuge back there, so ours is filtered, so it's a little on the clearer side, where sometimes they're typically a little more hazy and unfiltered, but ours is actually pretty clear.
There was growing up in my beer drinking history, I only knew until places like Open Gate Brewery started brewing Bocks and things. There was only one Bock. It came from Texas, and it kind of looked.
But he's a Shiner.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of looked like this. It was like, okay, is that what do you call it? Style standard, or is that a different type of Bock than what you'd be brewing here?
I don't know.
How Shiner defines that beer.
I actually don't know either. That's like a good question.
In traditional German brewing, a Bock, just a standard Maibock, is golden in color. It's lighter in color because it's a stronger variation of a Helles. When you get into Doppelbocks, that's when you get a darker color, because they'll end up using, typically darker malts to bring a little bit more of that melanoidin character and a little bit more of that roasty character. So a Weizenbock tends to be kind of in the middle of those two.
All right. So I know you've heard this, and this is about the draft stout.
I know where you're going with this.
I'm sure you do.
I don't.
People have said that the draft stout that you drink here in America tastes different than the draft stout you drink in Dublin. Having consumed a fair quantity on both sides of the pond, I don't know if it was, I
It's the same.
Yes, there was not a discernible difference, except that suddenly I'm in Ireland and I'm like, this is fresher.
Yep.
It tastes great. Is there anything to that?
I think age is one. Like, it's obviously more fresh.
Sure.
Depending on where you get it, probably. I mean, when we get it here, it's how old?
2.5 months.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's pubs in Dublin that have kegs that old.
Yeah.
Too, but
yeah. There are a couple of reasons why, and we get this question every single day.
I was going to say, because everybody says it, and everybody who goes over to Ireland comes back and says, it tasted so different over there.
Well, look.
You're on vacation. That's your favorite.
Every vacation beer is better than every beer after work.
You're drinking at 11 in the morning. That's why.
And it's also, I think there's two reasons. Number one is the experience of it. There's no doubt about it. If the last pint that you had before you left the States was in an airport bar and, maybe they were having a busy night and it wasn't exactly the best representation of the beer. And when you arrive in Dublin, you've taken a red eye, you're on vacation, you go out to a pub that's 1,000 years old. The bartender that's pouring the pints has been working there since they opened, right? Someone strikes up a fiddle. There's a sheep that walks by, a breeze blows in, and they put that perfectly poured pint down in front of you. Is it going to taste different? Yeah, of course it is. And I think a lot of it boils down to the fact that Guinness Draft Stout and Guinness, the brand, are so intimately woven into the fabric of Ireland and intimately woven into the fabric of Dublin society that it's taken very, very seriously there. And that's not to say there aren't pubs and bars across our nation that take it as seriously, because there absolutely are. You can throw a rock and hit a few of them here.
Sure.
We do certainly at the brewery. But the other part of the equation is that a journey of 5,000 miles can get really messed up in the last 50 feet between the keg and the glass. The quality equation is one that I'm hyper passionate about. So in addition to all the other things I do for Guinness, I work in on-premise quality for us. And so I travel to bars and restaurants and make sure that they're doing things the way that we would like them to do it. The temperature, the pressure, the gas, the cleanliness of the lines, the cleanliness of the glassware, all of these things really can combine to create an environment where maybe the beer doesn't do what you expect it to do. I can tell you, I've been lucky enough to have pints in Dublin a handful of times. And this last time I went over this past fall, I had a pint in this building before I left for the airport and then had nothing but water until I got to Dublin, went to my favorite pub in Dublin, ordered a pint and tried it. And it was, identical. The only difference, I was sat at a pub in Dublin.
This goes back to what you guys said at the beginning about people coming in and asking for a Guinness. Over there, you say a pint.
A pint.
And
I do that here.
Okay.
I have a pint.
And people... You just know what you're getting
here. Yeah.
Before we go on to something else, because we have talked about all the things that Megan and her team are brewing here. And there's something I want to ask you about that too. But what other things for the uninitiated who think Guinness is that pint of stout? What else is in the portfolio? What other beers are come from?
I mean, I think that's one of the great things about it, right? We are bound by nothing. If you're a brewer in the Czech Republic, you better make a kick-ass Czech Pils, Bohemian Pils. If you're a brewer in Bavaria and Germany, your Helles better be amazing. If you're working in Ireland, maybe you try a stout. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Right. But there are parts of the world where the geographic expectation that's placed on brewers are, here's what we do in this part of the world. Yeah. This is what you need to be good at. In the United States, thanks to, in many ways, and I'll say this because we just lost him, thanks to Jimmy Carter, the American craft beer industry would not be what it has become without President Jimmy Carter. We are bound by nothing. And so when you look at our menu right now, there are a few staples from Dublin. We mentioned Guinness Draft Stout, but also beers like Extra Stout and Foreign Extra Stout. The anchors that are brewed here in Chicago are Corn Maze Cream Ale, one of the best representations of an American cream ale that I have ever had. And I'm not saying that just because Meg is here. Kinsey Street Pale Ale, which is an American pale ale, the beer, in my opinion, that the American beer industry was built upon. Those two are always on tap. Okay. And then everything else is really, we joke all the time. It's what the brewers want to drink, but they have a keen awareness of styles and what they think an audience coming into this building is going to want to see. So yes, pale ales, we leave the hazies to Nate. That's his job. Nate loves a hazy. So you'll see hazies on here, but you'll also see, you mentioned Kentucky Common. We'll do historic styles. We'll put our spin on those, but we'll also do new things. We did a beer St. Patrick's Day last year that we called Porrig Stout, which was a stout. You come to Guinness. Oh yeah, a stout. This one was 7% alcohol. I think it was an elevated stout, but it had vanilla, it had chocolate, it had coffee. So we changed everything that people think about Guinness, not just through giving you something other than Guinness Draft Stout, but leaning into what makes the American beer industry so unique. And what makes it unique is everything.
As a younger, less educated listener, Proxy, what did Jimmy Carter do?
Oh, man. So Jimmy Carter did a lot of things, but Jimmy Carter removed the restrictions on home brewing that had been in place for decades and decades. And so he allowed for the creation of beers not in a commercial setting. And so that gave license to people like Jim Cook, Ken Grossman, all these guys to men and women to get into the brewing industry all of a sudden with an eye on experimentation, with an eye on creating different beers than the beers their parents had drank. And really that was the first step into the craft boom that we saw throughout the 80s and 90s.
That makes a lot of sense. I also want to follow up on Guinness not tasting different on one side of the pond or the other. As a brewer, we know that beer is water, malt, hops, and yeast. And a couple brewers have commented that the Chicago water is really great. So coming from Baltimore to Chicago, is there actually a difference in the water when you're brewing?
It is a bit softer than it is in Baltimore. We treat our water in Baltimore and in Chicago in the same way. And we maybe have to treat it a little differently in the brewing process. It is good brewing water in Chicago.
What makes it good brewing water?
You don't want a super hard water.
And by hard, what do you mean by that?
You like those carbonates, the things that can, like calcium carbonate, those types of compounds in water that can scale and create those sorts of issues. Mainly like pH issues in your mash and those sort of things. So we don't have that issue in Chicago where the pH is a little bit higher. You have to deal with some acid, add some acid into your mash, that sort of thing. But consistency is also a big thing. So with city water, because it's not unlike a well where seasonality is a big thing, it's a little more consistent in that way, if that makes sense.
I know we got a little sciencey there, but we're actually all about getting sciencey in the show.
Love science.
I mean, Johns Hopkins, my God.
This is
Meg
where
knows some science.
This is where I point out that I have a musical theater degree.
Oh, we're gonna get to that.
I'm just happy to be here.
We're gonna get to that. Last beer-related question before we turn to the boards and national tours and all of that. You're on your tap list now is an export stout. I haven't heard that term before. What is an export stout, and how did you have to convince somebody? Yeah, we're the home of draft stout. I'm going to make my own stout and just tell the harp to sit out.
Yeah, you're referring to Fonio stout on the menu, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so an export stout is just a stout that you made to export.
Oh,
so
okay.
A little bit higher ABV. Foreign extra stout is an export stout. Beers that were made,
arguably the original export stout.
Beers that were made somewhere to then be sent elsewhere. So higher ABV to withstand that travel to not spoil. Back in the day, that was where that originated.
Okay.
So Fonio stout, maybe you should talk about Fonio, but it was a fun project. We collaborated with Brooklyn Brewery.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily. Maybe you should just talk about that one.
Are you exporting it to New York?
It was actually brewed in New York. We exported it here. The original. I mean, in many ways, the original export stout was a beer that we now call Foreign Extra Stout, but began its life in 1801 as Guinness West Indies Porter. So it was a very literal name. This is a porter that we brewed to send to the West Indies.
Okay.
Eventually, that beer started going so many different places around the world that it became Foreign Extra Stout. So that beer, which we serve here, you can find it all over the country. That is one of the best-selling beers in Guinness's universe. If you travel to most other countries in the world where Guinness beer is served, and you do the thing that we've been talking about all night, which is say, I want a Guinness, chances are you're going to get a Foreign Extra Stout, which is a carbonated beer. 7.5% alcohol is what we get here. In places like West Africa, Malaysia, they have their own version of Foreign Extra Stout that is brewed locally, using local grains, using local water. Sometimes the ABV is a little bit different. Foreign Extra Stout is a massively important part of the beer story, especially for Guinness. And then Fonio Stout, it's the reason it's called Fonio Stout. It utilizes a West African ancient grain called Fonio. It's a grain that has not been used very broadly in beer. We know about things like barley, wheat, rye, oats, corn, rice, even sorghum is one that you see fairly often. Fonio is an ancient grain. It looks a little bit like couscous. It's a very difficult thing to brew with. I would defer to Meg on that, but because it's almost powdery or like sand, it's not as capable of helping with the filtering process like barley is, or extraction process, I guess I should say. So yeah, I mean, I defer to you. That grain, I can't imagine it was easy.
What makes it so difficult?
Well, like you said, it looks like sand or normal barley. I don't know if you've ever seen a kernel of barley. Sure. Barley, it looks, I don't even know how to describe it, but obviously
a little bit more prominent.
Yeah, like much bigger. Barley has.
Could we say it's husky?
It has husk material. It's husky, which helps in that filtering process. So yeah, if you were the only way you could make a beer with 100% fonio was if you had what's called a mash filter, where if you actually like squeezed the grain and squeezed the liquid out of the grain, where normal brewing process equipment is sort of just a false screen, so the wort will fall through the grain. So if you just had a tiny bit of sand, you're not going to get a lot of liquid to fall through that, if that sort of makes sense.
Traditional commercial brewing, we rely on the spent grain to act as a natural filter bed. So it allows the liquid to drop out, but you don't pick up much of that spent material. The way I describe using fonio or even some of the other adjunct ingredients versus using barley, it's like cleaning up a spill on a table with a paper towel versus cleaning it up with tissue paper. With a paper towel, you can wring out the liquid. If you use tissue paper, it just sort of disintegrates. That's similar to what we're talking about with fonio. It is easier to get the liquid away from something like barley than it is something like fonio.
All right. We'd focused on Meg's background, going to Johns Hopkins and being a scientist at heart and coming to beer. But we have another unique origin story here. You brought it up, musical theater major. Now, you've not only majored in musical theater, then you were in a national tour of The Wizard of Oz, where you played...
I played the Cowardly Lion and Uncle Henry and the Osgard and all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. And you also did sports radio.
I did sports talk radio in Baltimore, yeah.
And then you came here. Cody, would you like to ask your pun?
You at one point played the Emerald City Guard with an emerald mustache. Do you think that was an omen of things to come with Guinness from the Emerald Isle?
It certainly could have been. I will tell you.
Have you considered that before my question?
I had not considered that before your question, but I will say, when I was on tour with that musical, I had pints of Guinness Draft Stout, and this is long before I worked for Guinness. I had pints of Guinness Draft Stout in 46 of 50 states.
Nice.
So that became kind of a running gag for me. So I've seen all manner of pints of Guinness Draft Stout in this great nation of ours.
And in which state did it taste the best?
The state of ease, the state of rest, I think would be the answer to that question. No, it's, look, there are parts of this country, Chicago among them, New York among them, Boston among them. There are places where there are some serious pubs in this land of ours, Baltimore included. I will always include Baltimore.
There you go.
But yeah, I will tell if
do you ever go across the bar when you see someone just pour it like they pour a lager or something?
I mean, Meg can tell you stories.
It's the worst.
Yeah, they don't like hanging out with me in those moments. I will tell you one of my favorite stories of all time, if I may, very quickly.
Yes, go.
I got the opportunity to spend a day in trade in the market with a guy whose title was head of Guinness quality in Dublin. What a title.
That's a great job too.
His name was Sean Mackett, and Sean had been with Guinness for time out of mind, and took us out on a tour of different pubs in Dublin. And Sean shows up in suit and tie. This guy's suited and booted. He's got his case filled with all of his beer quality tools. And when he walks in the bar, the bartenders all just kind of stand up a little bit straighter, because it's very different than it is here in the States. In Dublin, in Ireland, Guinness controls beer quality from grain to glass.
Wow.
So when the beer is sold to a pub, we still keep an eye on it. We install the draft equipment. We maintain the draft equipment. So when Sean walks into the bar, you better make sure everything's good. Man. And what I realized very quickly about Sean over the course of that evening was that he had 3 types of pints of Guinness Draft Stout. There was a good pint, a great pint, and a brilliant pint. That was the measuring stick. And toward the end of the day, we went into a pub where everything was just a little bit off.
Okay.
Temperature was a bit off. Yes, it happens in Dublin. Temperature was a bit off. Pressure was a bit off. The glassware wasn't quite clean. And as we're walking out, I'm like, okay, we finally got this guy. Like, there's no way. There's no way that this is a good pint of Guinness Draft. And as we get out of the bar, I'm kind of poking him a little bit on this. And I say, Sean, what kind of pint was that? He goes, it's a good pint. I said, wait a minute. Let's take a pause here, because we've been out all day today. You've never said anything's worse than good. There's no way that's a good pint. And I'm going on, and he gets this close to my face, and I won't use the word he used. He gets this close to my face. He says, "It's still a pint of Guinness." So whenever I think about beer quality when it comes to Guinness Draft Stout, there's always Sean in the back of my head going, no matter how bad it gets, it's still a pint of Guinness.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. How long does it take? Now, working in the back of house, do they make you learn to pour the perfect?
Oh, Meg knows.
Meg knows the things. Yeah, Ryan's made me learn, I should say. I feel like I pour as good of a pint as you now. I'm pretty good at pouring a pint.
That's aggressive.
That's a nice flex,
he's definitely poured way more pints.
Sure.
But I think I'm pretty good at it.
You might be a natural.
I think so.
Yeah, see?
Exactly.
You never know.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for the final four. These are the questions we ask every brewer, every guest that we have. The first one probably is more geared toward you, Megan. The other three are for both. But it's the hill you'll die on. A style of beer that maybe people love, maybe it's all the rage, but you, for whatever reason, will not brew it.
Maybe just those, what do they call them? Milkshake, stout type beers. It's not gonna happen here.
Okay, good. Surprisingly, that is the answer that 95% of brewers have said.
I'm surprised. I thought you were going to go in another direction.
What did you think?
What'd you think?
In 7.5 years, there's one style of beer I can tell you flat out we've never done. Baltimore, Chicago, doesn't matter. We've never had one.
Give me a hint.
Seasonal. Incredibly seasonal.
Pumpkin ale?
Never done a pumpkin beer.
That's true.
We have never done a pumpkin beer.
It's not that I think they are awful. I think there can be good ones, but I think they're maybe just overdone a bit. Yeah. Maybe we got to wait a little longer.
Can I give you a hill I'll die on?
Sure.
Not from a brewing standpoint, but from a taproom and brewery standpoint.
Yes.
8-ounce pours, always 100% better than flights.
You are only the second brewery that has said they don't like flights.
Nope.
They
8-ounce pours over flights every day of the week.
See, Dovetail is the other one. No flights at Dovetail. An 8-ounce pour makes more sense.
Was that my buddy JP? Was that Jenny?
It was Hagen.
Oh,
Hagen. Hagen said no.
Cheers to Dovetail. I knew I love those guys.
They will not do much. I like an 8-ounce better. You really get to the feel that you've experienced that beer.
We could do a 45-minute podcast on flights. Yeah. I could do that long on flights.
But all right, we got to veer off. Just hit the clock for a minute. For the layman, the average beer drinker who goes into a brewery that they've never been to before, I've always thought, and I'm guilty of this too, if I'm somewhere out of town and I go into a brewery, I'll get a flight to sample their things because what you, like a style that you make and that I might really love, they might make that style.
I get it, but ask for a taste. Like that's a way better way for you to experience the beer and for staff to not have to deal with.
Well, I understand the manpower angle. That for the staff, it's a pain.
But for you to have little 4-ounce glasses sitting out for 30
will I get
minutes,
the same from a taste?
You're gonna
taste is great. They'll give you
an ounce or two.
Okay. They'll give you 2 ounces. You can decide if you like it or not. If you like it, get 8 ounces. Okay. If you don't, move on. You know?
When you get a flight, when people get flights, and I'm not here to yuck anybody else's yum.
Well, no,
right? Whatever you want to do. But from a beer quality standpoint, what I always struggle with is if you get 4, let's call them 5-ounce beers, right, as part of a flight, you're going to do one of two things, and both of them are wrong. You're either going to take a sip of each one right in a row, which means your palate is wrecked and you can't really give each beer a proper thought.
Yep.
Or you're going to do what you should do, which is drink each beer, think about it, talk about it, appreciate it. And by the time you get to beers 2, 3, and 4, they've lost their foam, they've lost their carbonation, they're warm.
That's true.
They're not the experience the brewers intended you to have.
Okay.
When I go to a brewery, I want the beer the way the brewers intended me to have the beer. And that's what I always think about. That's why we do 8-ounce pours. Will we do flights someday? I have no idea. Right now, we don't. Stick with an 8-ounce pour. And if you talk to the bartenders, like Meg said, we'll give you a sample of whatever you want to try.
Perfect. No, it's just, I had never heard that before because not everywhere, most places have flights. So when having you say that and then hearing it, it's like, oh, it makes more sense when it's explained that way. All right. Second question. A beer, Megan, that you brewed that might have been lovely, and you touched on one earlier, but for whatever reason, you're not going to do it again. You might have loved it. People might have loved it. It might have been top tier, but you're like, that was a pain in the ass.
Pain in the ass beer. Could you have one in mind?
Oh, I got a couple of these too. Yeah, come on, I know all these beers. Yeah.
In particular, here we did like a big oatmeal stout, and I didn't even brew it. It was the other brewer, Nate, that brewed it. But it was like a 5-hour runoff. It was just a terrible.
One of the best beer names we ever had, though.
The beer name was "We Made Another Stout"
with an exclamation point. We made another stout.
So that was just a terrible day. Like just a really long runoff. We'll probably still make it again.
The fastest selling beer we ever made in Baltimore, they have never made again because it was too much of a pain in the ass to make.
What was that?
Lemon pound cake ale.
The barrel aged one?
No. That was lemon peppermint. The pound cake one.
Oh.
The one that was like raspberries and mangoes and raspberry, mango, blueberry, strawberry, lactose, vanilla.
Just a lot of stuff.
And it was half kettle soured. It was this whole thing. And people bought the ever loving hell out of that beer. I remember talking to Sean, I'm like, when are we bringing that back? He's like, I'm going to bring that back. Either that or using the strawberry puree. That was another one.
Yeah, we made a strawberry beer in Baltimore, and it like turned out strawberry is a tough flavor in beer. It's not a very strong flavor to get as a puree. And we added it, you add it to a yellow beer, right? And it kind of turned gray. So it just sort of looked disgusting.
People drank it so fast. They were like, this is the most delicious thing. I was like, making that again? He's like, it looked like weird Pepto-Bismol, man. I'm not going to mess with that again.
That's definitely one of your close your eyes and drink it beers.
Close
your eyes and drink it.
People love that beer.
That's a weird one.
That's a great beer name, though. Weird Pepto-Bismol.
Weird Pepto-Bismol. Yeah. Might as well, I might give it a try.
Quick producer follow-up question. What is the runoff and why is a 5-hour runoff so painful?
So that was the process of separating what we call wort, which is this sugar water we make in the brew house. Separating the wort from your grain. And so we used a lot of oats in that beer. Rolled oats, oats, where it's like what you'd get in the grocery store oatmeal. So it just sticky. Just that liquid did not want to go through those grains. So yeah, it took forever.
It was a good beer. That's right. We haven't brought that back yet.
We'll bring it back. You can use a malt oat, which actually has a husk, and it's easier to use.
For both of you, and you can decide who goes first. And it can be one that you brew. It could be one of Guinness's portfolios, but your favorite off the clock go-to beer.
My Guinness beer is cream ale. That's my it's on all the time, and it's my favorite probably. But outside of beer, we drink a lot of High Life. A lot of High Life.
Yep. That's fair to say.
Daisy Cutter was probably our it's probably both of our first independently Chicago favorite beers, or
Yeah, do you have
a different beer?
High Life. I mean, I have all the beers, but
all the beers.
I mean, if it off the clock beer, that makes me think end of a tough day at work, you're going to have a beer. And to me, that's. I mean, honestly, it's Guinness Draft Stout an awful lot too.
Yeah.
But yeah, High Life is on that short list. PBR has been on that list.
Really has.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So lately. So yeah, I mean, Coors Original. I mean,
a nice light
liquid beer. Yeah.
Everybody. I'm not surprised by it anymore, but I was surprised initially how many brewers had that same answer. High Life.
High Life it's just, I don't know, it's become like a brewer's beer.
Yeah, it definitely is.
When I say, Meg moved to Chicago about a month after I got here. It's something about being in the Midwest too, man.
Yeah.
You're in the, I know it's Wisconsin.
You're sure.
The land of our friend Brian here, but there's something about being here. There's something about being in the Midwest when it comes to High Life.
We probably are overlooking Guinness Draft because we drink a ton of Guinness Draft.
I mean, that's the number one.
Yeah.
Everything else is playing for second place.
Yeah.
For sure.
Not because we have to drink Guinness Draft. It's, because we want to.
Yeah, do you have a frequent mug club for yourselves where you get a promotion once you hit X amount of pints?
I don't think we should do that. That sounds like a terrible idea.
Meg hit her 1,000th pint. Now she gets a bump.
Yeah. Somebody asked me that question the other day. They were like, how long have you been working for Guinness? Almost 8 years. They're like, how many pints of Guinness Draft Stout? It's like, God. And it's,
I don't think you want to know enough.
No. And I mean, it's, I look at that beer, I think so uniquely and so much differently than so many people do. Because I'm looking at it from a point of view of, I can hear a pint being poured out of a tap and tell you if something's wrong with it. So it's a very weird relationship I have with that beer. That being said, it is the most special beer in the world. I don't think there's any question about it.
No, well, just think of the global presence and how it unites countries and people. It's, it's close to home. So last question, and again, use your beer, your favorite beer and food pairing.
Foreign extra stout which again has been around for 200 years. There's when I think about food and beer pairings, you think about the 3 C's, right? Complementing, contrasting, or cutting. One of the weirdest contrasting pairings, which is the most difficult, I think, to find, is Foreign Extra Stout, which is this big, bold, roasty export stout. It's got notes of butterscotch and caramel and certainly espresso roasty. Curry chicken salad with that beer, for whatever reason, is just brilliant. It goes so well together. Another weird contrasting one, I do workshops for our staff to get them ready for Cicerone exams. Yes. And one of the ones that we found I do a workshop every time I teach the class, where I go to the grocery store and just find the most random things I can find. I'll just spend $200 on whatever it happens to be there. And one of our staff one day while doing this found that American IPA, like old school bitter 7% American IPA with blue cheese stuffed olives, was the most brilliant pairing in the world. And I was like, get out of here. That's terrible. And then I tried it and it's magic. Huh. It's like a Ratatouille moment where like the fireworks are going off. And then Saison DuPont and literally anything, whatever you've got in your kitchen. That's fine. That works.
Did you have time to think?
When I first moved here, I have a kegerator. I've only gotten like 1 keg since I've moved here, but it was Daisy Cutter. Okay. And I got pizza when I first moved here. So maybe just pizza and a pale ale.
Chicago pizza and pale ale.
Yeah.
There you go. Very nice.
Pretty good.
Oh yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here. This has been a lot of fun and an honor. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer. Be sure to support your local brewery, because without your support, it's tough times for some of our local brewery friends. So make sure you don't just talk about it. Go there, have some beers, and support. Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer is produced by award-winning podcast producer Cody Goff. You can check out all our episodes and get in touch with us via the website, craftybrewerspod.com. And if you have a brewery you would like us to visit, or if you are a brewer who looks at Meg and Ryan and says, they didn't look like they were tortured too much, this might not be so bad, return our emails or get in touch with us at craftybrewerspod@gmail.com. Cody wants us to.
That was amazing.
That
was amazing. Return our emails. How about you just return our emails?
We're asking. We love you. We treat you good.
I feel attacked.
Oh no, it wasn't.
Attacked.
No, you are one of. Well, you're in the industry, and we were told early on, brewers never check emails. So that was told to us when we first started. So do not feel attacked.
That was really funny, Brian. That got me. Return our emails.
And Cody wants me to remind you that if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, oh my gosh, tap your phone, give us 5 stars. I don't know why that matters, but it does to Cody and to everybody who, has algorithms and whatnot. Thanks again to Megan Schwarz, the senior brewer here, and to Ryan Wagner, a man who does return emails. But he does return emails. He is the marketing coordinator and Guinness's national ambassador. Thanks to everybody here at Guinness Open Gate Brewery. I'm Brian Noonan. Cody, any last words?
Yeah, this is where I'm going to insert a photo of both you and me from the Guinness, location in Dublin, pouring the perfect pint. We have certificates.
As I mentioned to you, Cody, everybody gets that certificate.
You're not supposed
to. It doesn't matter how bad you do.
Don't mention that on
don't harsh our
But mine
mellow.
really was perfect, as you'll see if you're watching the video
I have a nice
of
picture
this.
of my pint. Maybe not as good as yours, Megan. We hear you're a savant, a pint savant.
I am. Brian doesn't believe me, but
the gauntlet has been laid.
Well, thanks for being here. Sláinte.
Cheers.
Cheers.